Ladies and gentlemen, what I've come to show today is the Rural Post Service of the Cayman Islands. A number of you may well have come across the story of the local posts struggling way back in 1907-08 with almost a suspension of the wagon service, which to serve the outer of the villages. And the scheme was to improve the service by reducing postal rates to a halfpenny for inland mail and to farthing for postcards and for printed sort of matter. The wagoner was reintroduced together with the service getting extended beyond Bodden Town by a messenger service by one of the police constables, or two police constables, Graham, did the service, riding sort of back and forth as far as sort of East End. A hand stamp was sort of brought in for the wagoner to use and apply to mail, and we start off with what's the earliest example of this Rural Post hand stamp on the cover as late as December 1909. What happened between the service being started in late 1908 and 1909, we don't actually know. The hand stamp could be applied initially to any mail both within the Caymans and mail without. Within a short period, it was decided that mail going outside the Caymans should no longer have the hand stamp. When John Bile told me about the Cayman Isles service, he explained this to me, and it was quite interesting that of the three first outgoing covers, there are two here going to sort of Co, and there is a third cover here, exactly the same. This one is December, this one I think is February, and this one is in the March, by which time the hand stamp is no longer used. And any of the mail going to sort of Co, we no longer sort of see the hand stamp. There's a cover here much earlier as part of the Co service to show that it was a long-standing correspondence. The hand stamp then is shown on a number of examples, some at the correct rate. One here registered sort of going abroad, which is rather unusual. There's a cover here that you wonder what is it doing in the sort of collection. This one here, and probably one of the more interesting covers in that it doesn't have the hand stamp, but it's clearly part of the Rural Post sort of story. It has 4 farthing stamps on the front. It has sort of 6 on the back, of which 2 have sort of fallen off, paying the halfpenny rate abroad. It was going abroad, so it did not receive the hand stamp. We know where it came from because it says from the sender, from Joseph Watler, Lower Valley, Grand Cayman. Lower Valley on the sort of map is between Georgetown and Bodden Town. And what this person would have done is they would have walked up from where they lived up to the main road. When he knew the wagoner was going by, he would have handed the mail to him, and then it would have been taken by the wagoner. He would not have applied the hand stamp because it was going abroad, and it would have been postmarked at Georgetown. You would obviously ask me, why do I know that it was done in that way, not just taking it to sort of Georgetown? It's because of the stamps. It's got farthing stamps on it. The stamps are attached at both ends, but the ones in the middle are not applied. On the back, 2 of the stamps had fallen off. We know that the wagoner carried the farthing stamp with him. We know that it was going back and forth on the wagon over this period of time. Without doubt, the gun became disturbed. Some of the stamps would have stuck, others wouldn't have done. In the post office, the stamps would have been fine, and the law would be normally applied and wouldn't have fallen off. So I think there's no doubt that was actually handled by the service. We have an example here of official mail, not bearing any stamps at all. Again, having the hand stamp. By this time, we've moved over to sort of East End to the messenger picking up the mail. All the first examples, apart from that one, have the large hand stamp. We now have the small hand stamp, which appears much later, in late 1911, and was used for the next sort of few years on sort of mail. The example there, as I say, is on mail that was official and didn't need any stamps. There is an example that I can't show today, unfortunately. I've just bought in James Auction of a similar official cover with the large hand stamp on. This item I bought many years ago. I was quite fascinated by it. I was told not worth buying because it has a nasty stain on it. To which I said, well, I don't mind. It is in fact the only example of mail being sent from East End and actually delivered en route. So it was sent clearly by a young lady to her friend, to a Miss Sadie Hines at South Sound. She's actually drawn in line where she was going to write the address. I suspect she either asked her mother for a stamp, or she had a stamp herself. She presumably didn't know the postal rate had been reduced from a penny to a halfpenny, so they applied a sort of penny stamp way out in sort of East End. The mail would have come along the normal mail route, and then it would have been diverted, as the map shows you, off the main mail route down to South Sound when it was delivered. And this is the only example of mail we know delivered sort of en route. Two covers here which need to be considered together. One has the East End Rural Post hand stamp, the other doesn't have that at all. Why is this example in here? Because they were handled together. They were obviously given to the messenger at East End. They had the same date of passing through Bordentown, the same date at Georgetown. They then went on to Jamaica, where this was attempted to be delivered. This one has the same date in Jamaica, and then was sent on to England. I can only assume that when this was given to the messenger, he presumably didn't have any stamps to actually to sell to the correspondent for him to apply for mail. It got stuck in the mail and thus got bypassed. So by the time it got to England, it had the 2 pence sort of tax mark on it and was doubly charged. This one is particularly interesting, is that it travelled all the way to Jamaica at the same time as this cover. It was then, it couldn't be delivered, it was advertised, it was unclaimed, it then made the journey back, and it's an example we know of making the journey back to the Cayman Islands. It went back to the island, was given it to a wagoner, he then gave it to the messenger. One of the two knew who it came from, so they actually wrote the name, so they knew exactly where it had sort of come from. And this is what happens with the local service. They know who's giving them the mail because it is just so many examples of mail. You have an example here, again with the East End mark, again sent abroad to Montgomery Ward. Somehow it receives a hand stamp, which it shouldn't have done at this late date. An example of two sort of farthings, and there's some other examples of the farthings correctly used at the correct rate on what is a philatelic cover. Very late on, for a very short period of time, we think the ordinary hand stamp either disappeared, that was brought into use in 1913. It either disappeared or something happened, and for a very short period they got the rural post councillor out, and they again used it on sort of mail for a few months. They're applied in black. They are quite sort of scarce. I think we know about 4, and they're always rather sort of poor strikes because it had been left in the drawer for sort of 3 or 4 years. It was obviously a court council, and or a rubber council, should I say, and obviously deteriorated. In 1913, their service was extended to West Bay, and there are a couple of examples there of the sort of hand stamp used at West Bay. I'm not sure whether there was a messenger service to West Bay or not. We're told there was, but I'm not sure whether that story is true. Graham has often thought that mail was brought from West Bay by schooner, as compared to overland. Definitely from East End at this period, mail was taken overland. A selection of the route posts of the Cayman Islands.
Thank you.